I watched my 13-year-old son stand in my parents' kitchen, tears streaming down his face, scrubbing gravy off plates, while my sister's daughter laughed at the Thanksgiving table I'd paid $15,000 to set. They didn't just exclude him from dinner. They made him watch through the doorway as the family ate, made him wait, made him invisible. When the last fork was placed down, my mother pointed at the mountain of dishes and said, "Get started." Not please, not his name, just get started. My son, my brilliant, kind, gentle boy, picked up a dirty plate with shaking hands. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It calcified, cold, sharp, final. I'd spent 45 years begging these people to love me. I'd sent them money, visited when they never came to me, forgiven insults Caroline never had to endure. I'd brought my son to their table, believing that maybe this time would be different. I was wrong, but I wasn't helpless. See, there's something my parents forgot when they humiliated my child. I'm a financial analyst. And 5 years ago, after my father's health scare, they made me co-holder on every account they own. We drove home in silence. I opened my laptop. $847,000 stared back at me. One click, one message. Thanksgiving is over. What came next? 110 missed calls were just the beginning. Because when you make my son eat your leftovers in the corner like a dog, you don't just lose money. You lose everything. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 45 years old, a financial analyst, and a widow. For 3 years, I've been raising my son Ethan alone, and for 45 years, I've been trying to earn my family's love. This Thanksgiving, I thought I'd finally found the key. The check cleared on November 18th. $15,000, half my savings, wired directly to my mother's account with a note that read, "For the perfect Thanksgiving, let's make this year special." I didn't mention that special meant something very specific to me. It meant my son would finally feel like he belonged at their table. It meant my mother would look at Ethan the way she looked at my sister Caroline's daughter Madison, with warmth instead of obligation. It meant that maybe after all these years of being the daughter who never quite measured up, I could buy my way into acceptance. Pathetic, I know. But hope makes fools of us all. Ethan and I left Boston at 6 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, driving 2 hours north to my parents' sprawling colonial in the suburbs where I grew up. He was quiet in the passenger seat, scrolling through his phone with the practiced disinterest of a 13-year-old boy trying not to appear nervous. But I saw his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his collar. I'd made him wear the cashmere sweater I'd bought specifically for today, navy blue, expensive, presentable. I wanted my parents to see what I'd done right. "Mom," he said as we pulled into the circular driveway behind Caroline's white Mercedes SUV. "Do I have to hug Grandma?" The question broke my heart in small, familiar ways. "Just be polite, sweetheart. That's all I ask." My mother answered the door in her pearls and that fixed smile she reserved for company. "Emily, you're here." Not, "I'm so glad you're here," or "we've missed you." Just acknowledgement of my presence, like confirming a delivery. Her eyes slid past me to Ethan. "And you brought the boy." "His name is Ethan, Mom." I kept my voice light, cheerful, unthreatening. "Of course." She stepped aside, letting us in. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted turkey, like every Thanksgiving of my childhood, and for one stupid moment I let myself believe this could work. Caroline emerged from the kitchen looking effortlessly elegant in cream cashmere. Behind her, Madison, 10 years old, blonde, perfect, twirled in a velvet dress. "Aunt Emily!" Madison squealed with the kind of performative affection children learn when they know adults are watching. "Hi, Madison." I hugged her, noting how Caroline beamed with pride. When was the last time my mother looked at me like that? Dinner was served at 2 o'clock sharp. My father sat at the head of the table, silent as always, reading something on his phone. My mother directed traffic like a general. "Caroline, you sit here. Madison next to Grandpa. Emily, you're there." She pointed to the far end, the seat closest to the kitchen. The seat I'd occupied my entire childhood. I sat down, smoothing my napkin across my lap. Ethan stood beside me, waiting. There was no place setting for him. "Mom," I kept my voice even. "Where should Ethan sit?" My mother didn't look up from arranging the candlesticks. "Oh, we don't have enough chairs at the table, dear. He can wait in the kitchen until we're finished. There's a stool by the counter." The words hit me like cold water. "I'm sorry, what—" Caroline spoke up, her voice carrying that particular tone of patient condescension she'd perfected. "Guests eat after family M. It's always been that way. Madison is family. Your son is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "A guest." I looked at Ethan. His face had gone completely blank, that terrible blankness children adopt when they're trying not to cry in public. His hands were clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. "He's 13 years old," I said quietly. "He's your grandson. And he'll eat when there's room." My mother's voice was final. She gestured toward the kitchen doorway. "Go on, Ethan. You can watch from there. We won't be long." I should have stood up. I should have taken my son's hand and walked out that door immediately. But I didn't. God help me, I didn't. Because some broken part of me still hoped that if I just went along, if I just didn't make a scene, maybe they'd change their minds. Maybe they'd see how wrong this was. Ethan walked to the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the overhead lights, and watched us eat his grandmother's turkey, his grandfather's cranberry sauce, his aunt's sweet potato casserole. Watched Madison giggle and be praised for her table manners. Watched me sit there and do nothing. When Ethan picked up those dirty plates with shaking hands, I made a silent promise this would be the last time anyone made my son feel worthless. After the dishes were done, my mother handed Ethan a plate. Cold turkey, congealed gravy, a scoop of stuffing that had hardened at the edges. She set it on the kitchen counter without a word, then returned to the dining room where Caroline and Madison were eating pumpkin pie. I watched my son climb onto that stool, his legs dangling because it was too tall for him, and eat his Thanksgiving dinner alone while laughter drifted in from the other room. We left 20 minutes later. I mumbled something about traffic, about Ethan having school tomorrow, about needing to get home. My mother barely looked up from her coffee. Caroline hugged me at the door with the same enthusiasm she'd use for a distant acquaintance. "Thanks for coming, Em. The money really helped. Not, thank you for the generous gift, or, this meant so much to us. Just acknowledgement that my $15,000 had served its purpose." The November air was sharp and clean as we walked to the car. Ethan climbed into the passenger seat and clicked his seatbelt without speaking. I started the engine, adjusted the mirrors, and pulled out of the driveway. Neither of us said goodbye. Route 95 stretched ahead of us, 2 hours of highway cutting through the early darkness of a New England winter evening. I gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my knuckles white, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Every few minutes my mind would replay another moment, my mother pointing toward the kitchen, Caroline's casual cruelty, Madison's oblivious giggles, my father's silence. And Ethan standing in that doorway watching. Always watching. I glanced at my son. He was staring out the window, his forehead pressed against the glass, his breath fogging the pain in small circles that appeared and disappeared. His hands were folded in his lap, perfectly still. Too still for a 13-year-old boy. The streetlights caught his reflection, and for just a moment I saw myself at his age, the same empty eyes, the same careful blankness, the same desperate attempt to take up as little space as possible. That's when I realized what I'd done. I hadn't just allowed my family to humiliate my son. I'd delivered him to them. I'd paid $15,000 for the privilege of watching him learn the same lesson I'd spent 45 years trying to unlearn, that he wasn't enough, that he didn't belong, that love was something other people received but never him. The car felt suffocating. The heater was on too high, pumping stale air that tasted like failure. I wanted to say something, anything, but what could I possibly say that would undo what he'd witnessed? That would erase the image of his grandmother handing him leftovers like he was hired help? That would explain why his own family treated him like an inconvenience? We crossed into Massachusetts. An hour and 45 minutes had passed in absolute silence. The exit for our town appeared, and I took it navigating the familiar streets on autopilot. Past the grocery store where we shopped every Sunday, past Ethan's middle school, past the park where his father used to push him on the swings before cancer took him 3 years ago. Robert would have never allowed this. Robert would have stood up, taken Ethan's hand, and walked out the moment my mother pointed toward that kitchen. But Robert was gone, and I was all Ethan had, and I had failed him spectacularly. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring at our modest 2-story house, with its blue shutters and the porch light I'd left on. Home. Safe. And yet I'd taken my son away from this safety and driven him straight into the kind of psychological warfare I should have protected him from. Mom. His voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Did I do something wrong? I turned to look at him. He was still staring straight ahead, not meeting my eyes. Is that why Grandma doesn't like me? Did I mess something up? The words shattered something fundamental in my chest. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for him, pulling him across the center console into an awkward, desperate hug. He was too big for this now, all gangly limbs and teenage self-consciousness, but he let me hold him anyway. His shoulders started shaking, and I realized he was crying silent tears that soaked into my coat. You did nothing wrong, I whispered fiercely into his hair. Do you hear me? Nothing. I did. I brought you to people who don't deserve you. I thought if I tried hard enough, if I gave them enough, they'd finally see how incredible you are. But they can't. They're broken in ways I can't fix. And I'm so sorry I made you pay for my delusion. We sat there in the car for a long time, holding each other in the darkness while the engine ticked as it cooled. Finally, Ethan pulled away, wiping his face with his sleeve. Can we go inside? Yeah, sweetheart. Let's go inside. I made him hot chocolate while he changed into sweatpants. We sat on the couch and watched a movie neither of us paid attention to. At 10 o'clock, I sent him to bed, kissed his forehead, and told him I loved him. He mumbled it back, already half asleep. Then I went to my office and opened my laptop. 5 years ago, my father had a minor stroke. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to scare him into getting his affairs in order. He'd added me as a co-holder on all his accounts, checking savings investments, everything. Just in case something happens, he'd said. You're good with money, Emily. Better than Caroline. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given me. I logged into the investment account. The balance loaded $847,000. Years of careful investing, of compound interest, of the comfortable retirement they'd planned. My finger hovered over the account controls. There was an option I'd never used: freeze all transactions. It would lock the account, completely preventing any withdrawals, transfers, or trades until the hold was manually released by all account holders. I thought about Ethan's face as he picked up those dirty plates. I thought about my mother's casual cruelty. I thought about 45 years of being invisible. I clicked the button. The screen loaded, then displayed a confirmation message in green text. All transactions frozen. Account holders will be notified. I opened the messaging system and typed 4 words: Thanksgiving is over. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. The first call came at 6:30 the next morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, my mother's name flashing across the screen. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Then again. By the time I got Ethan off to school, I had 12 missed calls. I silenced my phone and went to work. My job as a financial analyst required focus, precision, the ability to compartmentalize emotion from numbers. I'd spent 20 years perfecting that skill. Today I used it to ignore the constant vibration in my desk drawer as call after call came through. During my lunch break, I finally looked. 43 missed calls. 27 text messages. The texts started polite, or what passed for polite in my mother's vocabulary. Emily, call me immediately. There's been a problem with the accounts. Then they grew more urgent. "What have you done? Call me now!" By evening, they'd devolved into barely coherent rage. "This is illegal. You're stealing from us. You're destroying your own parents. How could you do this to your family?" I deleted them without responding. That evening, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that my father had gone to the bank that afternoon. He'd tried to withdraw cash for their upcoming Florida trip, something they did every December to escape the New England winter. The teller had informed him that the account was frozen, all transactions suspended pending authorization from all holders. He'd apparently made quite a scene, demanding to speak to the manager, insisting there must be some mistake. The manager had calmly explained that no, there was no mistake. The account was legally frozen, and only I could unfreeze it. His credit cards were declined at dinner that night. My mother's card bounced at the grocery store the next morning. Their perfect, carefully curated life was grinding to a halt, and they couldn't understand why the daughter they'd spent 45 years dismissing suddenly held all the power. I spent the weekend with Ethan. We ordered pizza, watched movies, and pretended the world outside didn't exist. He seemed lighter somehow, as if leaving my parents' house had released some pressure valve I hadn't known was crushing him. We didn't talk about Thanksgiving. We didn't need to. Monday morning I was working from home when someone started pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of aggressive hammering that made my neighbor's dog start barking 3 houses down. I looked through the peephole and saw my mother's face twisted with fury, and Caroline standing behind her with her arms crossed. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened the door. "Good morning, Mom. Caroline." My mother pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, Caroline following close behind. They stood in my entryway like invading generals surveying conquered territory. My mother's hands were shaking her carefully applied makeup, unable to hide the rage modeling her cheeks. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you do this to us, after everything we've done for you, after we raised you, fed you, gave you everything. You gave me everything." The laugh that escaped my throat was sharp and brittle. "Is that what you call it?" Caroline stepped forward, her voice cold and professional. "You need to restore access to those accounts immediately, Emily. What you've done is elder abuse, financial manipulation. We can sue you. We will sue you." I closed the door calmly and leaned against it, blocking their exit. "You're welcome to try. I'm a legal co-holder on those accounts. I have every right to freeze transactions. But let me ask you something first." I looked directly at my mother. "Why did you humiliate my son?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What? Thanksgiving dinner. You made Ethan stand in the kitchen and watch us eat. You made him wash the dishes. You gave him cold leftovers. Why?" My mother's face transformed, the rage shifting into something worse, casual dismissal. "Oh, for heaven's sake, we were teaching him humility, teaching him his place. The boy needs to understand that respect is earned, not given." "His place," I repeated slowly. "He's 13 years old. He's your grandson." Caroline made a disgusted sound. "He's not really family, Em. Let's be honest. His father was nobody. Some middle-class insurance adjuster you married because you were desperate to escape. You think that makes him one of us." The words landed like physical blows, but I kept my face neutral. I'd learned that skill from them after all. Robert was a good man. He loved Ethan. He loved me. My mother laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that filled my small entryway. "Loved you, oh, Emily. You never understood what your husband really was." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stared at my mother, at the cruel twist of her mouth, at the satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. She was enjoying this, enjoying the way confusion flickered across my face, the way my certainty wavered. "What did you say?" She smiled. "You heard me. But that's not what we're here to discuss. You're going to unfreeze those accounts right now, or get out." My voice was quiet, but absolute. "Excuse me? Get out of my house. Both of you. Now. Caroline moved toward me, her finger pointing at my chest. You're making a huge mistake. We'll take everything from you. Everything. You'll regret. Out. I opened the door, cold December air rushing in. And don't come back. They left my mother spitting threats over her shoulder, Caroline's heels clicking angrily down my front steps. I closed the door and locked it, my hand shaking as I turned the deadbolt. The words hung in the air like poison. What did my mother mean about Robert? I spent the rest of the day unable to focus on anything. My mother's words kept echoing in my mind, but every time I tried to grasp their meaning, they slipped away like smoke. What had she meant about Robert? He'd been a good man, a devoted husband, a loving father. There was nothing to understand, except that he was gone, and I missed him every single day. Ethan came home from school at 3:30, dropping his backpack by the door with his usual teenage carelessness. I was sitting at the kitchen table staring at my untouched coffee when he paused in the doorway. Mom, you okay? I forced a smile. Fine, sweetheart. How was school? He shrugged, opening the refrigerator and pulling out an apple. He took a bite, studying me with those observant eyes that saw too much. Grandma and Aunt Caroline were here today, weren't they? I saw Mrs. Henderson watching from her window when I got off the bus. She does that whenever there's drama. They stopped by briefly. Did they yell at you? The directness of the question caught me off guard. A bit. It's fine. Ethan sat down across from me, turning the apple in his hands. Mom, can I tell you something about Thanksgiving? My stomach tightened. Of course. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When I was standing in the kitchen waiting for you guys to finish eating, Grandma came in to get more wine. She walked right past me and then she stopped. She leaned down and whispered something. I felt my chest constrict. What did she say? She said, "Your guests here, not family. Know the difference." He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face. What did she mean? Why would she say that? The memory hit me so hard I actually gasped. I was 10 years old, standing in my parents' kitchen on Thanksgiving, watching through the same doorway as they ate dinner with Caroline, my grandparents, and some family friends. My mother had told me to wait, that there wasn't enough room at the table that I could eat when they were finished. I'd asked my grandmother why Caroline got to sit, but I didn't. She'd leaned down, smelling of expensive perfume and wine, and whispered, "Guests wait. Family eats. Know the difference, Emily." I'd forgotten that moment. Or rather, I'd buried it so deep that it had become just another brick in the foundation of my childhood. But now, it came rushing back with perfect clarity, and I understood with horrible certainty that nothing about Thanksgiving had been spontaneous or unusual. They'd done this before. They'd done it to me. Mom? Ethan's voice pulled me back to the present. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry, Ethan. She said the same thing to me when I was your age. His face went very still. The exact same thing, word for word. We sat in silence, the weight of generational cruelty settling between us. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Come with me. I led him upstairs to the guest room closet where I kept boxes of old photographs and documents from my childhood. I'd moved them out of storage after Robert died, thinking maybe Ethan would want to see them someday to understand where he came from. Now I pulled down a large cardboard box labeled Family Photos and carried it to the guest bed. The photographs spilled out in a cascade of faded colors and forced smiles. I started sorting through them, and with each one, the pattern became more obvious. Christmas morning, age 8. Caroline front and center, opening a bicycle while I sat partially visible in the background. Easter Sunday, age 12. Caroline in a new dress beaming at the camera while I was cropped so severely that only half my face appeared at the edge of the frame. High school graduation. Caroline's ceremony took up an entire album while mine was documented in exactly 3 photos, all of them group shots where I stood at the periphery. Look at this one, I said, holding up a Thanksgiving photo from when I was about Ethan's age. Caroline sat at the table between our parents, all three of them laughing at something. I was visible through the doorway in the background, holding a stack of plates. Ethan took the photo from my hand, staring at it. You were in the kitchen. Every year until I left for college. I dug deeper in the box and found my old report cards still in their original envelopes. I opened them one by one, reading my mother's notes written in her precise handwriting. 4th grade straight A's. Not as impressive as Caroline's B's. Caroline is naturally gifted. 점 좋아해. 6th grade honor roll. Emily works hard. Caroline simply knows. 8th grade highest marks in the class. Perhaps if Emily applied herself to social skills the way she applies herself to academics, she'd be more well-rounded like her sister. I handed them to Ethan, watching his face change as he read them. She never thought I was good enough. Nothing I did mattered because I wasn't Caroline. And now she's doing the same thing to you. Because I'm not Madison, he said quietly. Because you're my son. Because in their twisted logic that makes you less than. I pulled out one more photograph, this one from Caroline's Sweet 16 party. The whole family was there, dressed in formal wear, champagne glasses raised in a toast. Caroline stood in the center, radiant in a white dress. Our parents flanked her on either side, beaming with pride. I wasn't in the photo at all. I remembered that party. I'd been there. I'd helped set up served appetizers cleaned up afterward. But when it came time for the family photograph, my mother had said, Emily, dear, go check on the caterers, would you? I realized then that my parents hadn't suddenly changed. They hadn't become cruel in their old age or developed some new capacity for cruelty. This was who they'd always been. I had simply stopped pretending they were capable of love. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat in my home office staring at my dual monitors. The photographs were still spread across the guest bed upstairs, a museum of calculated exclusion, but my mind had shifted into a different mode entirely. I was done being hurt. Done being the victim of their casual cruelty. It was time to do what I did best, follow the money. I logged back into my parents' investment account, but this time I wasn't looking at the balance. I was looking at the transaction history. As a financial analyst, I'd spent 2 decades identifying irregularities in corporate accounts, spotting fraud, tracing paper trails that people thought they'd hidden. If there was something wrong with my parents' finances, I would find it. The first red flag appeared within minutes. A withdrawal from October for $12,000 marked as estate planning consultation. The signature on the authorization looked like my father's, but something was off about the loops in the capital letters. I pulled up earlier transactions with his verified signature and compared them side by side. The October signature was close, but the pressure was different, the angle slightly wrong. Someone had traced his signature, practiced it, but hadn't quite mastered his particular way of signing his name. I dug deeper. August 25, 1,000 transferred to an account I didn't recognize, labeled as investment opportunity. July, 18,000 for medical expenses that didn't correspond to any insurance claims I could find in their healthcare portal. June, 32,000 marked simply as family assistance. The signatures on all of them had that same slightly off quality, as if someone had been forging my father's authorization for months. But it was the recurring monthly transfers that made my blood run cold. Every month, like clockwork, $5,000 moved from my parents' investment account to something called Carter Family Trust. I'd never heard of this trust. In all my years of helping my parents manage their finances, reviewing their estate planning, discussing their retirement strategy, no one had ever mentioned a Carter Family Trust. I searched for the trust registration in the state database. It had been established 3 years and 2 months ago, registered as a limited liability company with 2 listed beneficiaries. The primary beneficiary was listed as E. Carter. The secondary was listed as C. Carter Morrison, Caroline's married name. My hands started shaking. I pulled up my calendar and counted backward. 3 years and 2 months ago. March. 3 months after Robert died. 3 months after I'd been drowning in grief, barely able to get out of bed, leaving Ethan with my parents for weeks at a time while I tried to figure out how to be a widow at 42. 3 months after I'd signed dozens of documents in my parents' living room because my mother said they were just updating their estate planning and I needed to initial some paperwork as co-holder of their accounts. I'd been so numb with loss that I'd signed whatever they put in front of me. I pulled up my parents' bank statements from that period and cross-referenced them with major life events. March 3 years ago, the Carter Family Trust was established. April 3 years ago, my parents closed on a luxury waterfront condo in Fort Myers, Florida. Cash purchase $650,000. May 3 years ago, Caroline announced she'd received a major promotion at her tech company, came with a signing bonus she used to buy that white Mercedes SUV. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. I calculated quickly. $5,000 per month for 8 years. No, not 8 years. The transfer started 3 years and 2 months ago, so $5,000 per month for 38 months. $190,000 moved systematically out of my parents' investment account into a trust bearing my last name that I knew nothing about. I accessed the trust's bank records through the LLC database. The money didn't just sit there, it had been distributed. $60,000 to Caroline over the past year. $45,000 to my mother's personal checking account. $30,000 to cover the down payment on Madison's private school tuition. The rest remained in the trust, accumulating interest, waiting to be divided between E. Carter and C. Carter Morrison upon my parents' deaths. I pulled up the original trust documents, the ones filed with the state. They required electronic signatures from all parties. I zoomed in on the signature section. There was my name, Emily J. Carter, signed in a flowing script across the digital signature line. Below it, the date March 15th, 3 years ago. The day of Robert's funeral. I remembered that day in fragments. The church service. The cemetery. Coming back to my parents' house because I couldn't bear to go home to the empty rooms Robert would never fill again. My mother bringing me tea and telling me to rest. Caroline saying something about paperwork that needed to be handled quickly, estate things, beneficiary forms. Someone putting a tablet in front of me telling me to sign that it was just standard procedure after a spouse's death. I'd signed it at my husband's funeral while my son cried in the next room. I opened the image file of the signature and increased the magnification. The handwriting looked like mine at first glance, the same general shape, the same flourishes I used when signing documents quickly. But when I examined it closely, I could see the hesitation in the strokes, the slight tremor that came from someone copying rather than writing naturally. And underneath the digital signature, barely visible in the file's metadata, was a note, "Signature authorized by proxy, approved by account holder, Barbara Chen Carter." My mother had signed my name to a trust that had been siphoning money from my parents' accounts for over 3 years. She'd used my grief and confusion to get me to authorize it. And she'd made sure the beneficiaries were listed as E. Carter, which could mean Emily or Ethan and Caroline. I recognized the handwriting on the transfer forms instantly. It was my mother's precise script authorizing the monthly transfers, but the amounts were signed in my name, a name she'd forged 38 times. I spent 3 days analyzing every transaction, building a spreadsheet that documented each forged signature, each suspicious transfer, each financial irregularity that pointed to systematic theft. The Carter Family Trust was just the beginning. But the numbers only told part of the story, and I needed to understand all of it. I needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went. On Thursday morning, I drove to my parents' house. I'd learned through a neighbor that they'd gone to their bank's main branch downtown, probably trying to explain to increasingly skeptical managers why their daughter had frozen their accounts. I had maybe 2 hours before they returned. I used the key I'd kept from years ago, the one my mother had given me, for emergencies. The house was silent, filled with that particular stillness that comes from expensive furniture, and no real warmth. I walked through the living room with its cream carpets and crystal vases, past the dining room where Ethan had stood watching us eat, and climbed the stairs to the second floor. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling. I pulled down the folding ladder and climbed up into the dusty darkness, pulling the chain for the overhead bulb. The space was packed with labeled boxes, everything organized with my mother's obsessive precision. Christmas decorations, tax records, Caroline's childhood artwork. I scanned the labels until I found what I was looking for, shoved in the far corner behind a stack of luggage. Emily, college. The box was sealed with packing tape covered in dust that suggested it hadn't been opened in decades. I used my car key to slice through the tape and lifted the cardboard flaps. The first thing I saw was an envelope, crisp and formal, with Stanford University's return address in the corner. It was addressed to Emily J. Carter at my parents' address. The postmark read April 1999, 25 years ago. I was 18 then, finishing my senior year of high school, waiting desperately to hear back from the colleges I'd applied to. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, already knowing what I would find but needing to see it anyway. Dear Ms. Carter, congratulations. It is with great pleasure that we offer you admission to Stanford University's class of 2003. Furthermore, based on your exceptional academic record and standardized test scores, we are delighted to award you a full presidential scholarship covering tuition, room, and board for all 4 years. The letter went on describing orientation dates, housing options, required forms. At the bottom, someone from the admissions office had written a handwritten note. Your application essay about overcoming family adversity was particularly moving. We're excited to welcome you to the Stanford family. I read it 3 times, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. I'd gotten into Stanford. Full scholarship. One of the best universities in the country, and they'd wanted me enough to pay for everything. I'd never seen this letter. I dug deeper into the box. More envelopes from Stanford marked time sensitive and response required by May 1st. Campus housing information. Financial aid forms that just needed a signature. Everything a high school senior needed to accept admission to their dream school. All unopened. All hidden. Beneath the Stanford letters, I found other documents that made my stomach turn. Photocopies of recommendation letters written by my high school counselor, Mr. Henderson, addressed to Stanford's admissions office. Glowing paragraphs about my academic excellence, my leadership potential, my determination to succeed despite difficult family circumstances. But the copies in this box had been altered. Someone had carefully whited out Stanford University and typed in Quincy Community College above it. The same letters, the same words of praise, but redirected to the local community college where Caroline ended up after barely graduating high school. I found my SAT score report. 1480 out of 1600, top 1% nationally. But paper-clipped to it was another document, a college application for Caroline with my scores listed as hers. Her actual scores, 980, were marked through with red pen, and my 1480 was written in above them in my mother's handwriting. At the bottom of the box, I found scholarship checks. 3 of them made out to Emily Carter from the National Merit Scholarship Program, each for $5,000. They'd never been deposited, never processed. But behind them were bank statements from an account I didn't recognize showing deposits for $15,000 over 3 consecutive months, 25 years ago, all marked as scholarship funds for C. Carter Morrison. Caroline hadn't earned a scholarship. She'd stolen mine. With my mother's help, she'd taken my name, my scores, my teacher's words of belief in me, and used them to fund her own education. I sat back on the dusty attic floor, the documents spread around me like evidence at a crime scene. I remembered that spring 25 years ago, waiting for college acceptance letters that never came. I'd applied to Stanford, Berkeley, MIT, and a dozen other schools. My mother told me they'd all sent rejections. "It happens, honey," she'd said with false sympathy. "You're just not Stanford material. Community college is more your speed. Caroline's attending Quincy, too. You two can carpool." But Caroline didn't stay at Quincy. 2 years later, she'd transferred to a state university, suddenly able to afford the tuition. My parents said she'd earned a scholarship, that she'd finally applied herself. I remembered feeling bitter and jealous, wondering why Caroline always got the opportunities I didn't. Now I knew. She'd gotten them because they were mine first. I thought about Mr. Henderson, my English teacher, who'd believed in me, who'd spent hours helping me with my college essays and writing those recommendation letters. He'd died in a car accident the summer after I graduated, his truck going off the road late one night on his way home. Single vehicle accident, the police had said. No witnesses, just a tragedy. By the time I could have thought to ask him about my college applications, he was gone, taking the truth with him. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. Every letter, every forged document, every piece of evidence that my family had systematically stolen my future and given it to Caroline. The photos filled my phone's storage proof of a conspiracy that had derailed my entire life. I'd gone to community college because I believed I wasn't good enough for anything better. I'd worked full-time while taking classes part-time, taking 6 years to earn a bachelor's degree that I could have gotten from Stanford in 4. I'd met Robert at that community college, wonderful, kind Robert, who I'd loved desperately, but I'd always wondered what my life might have been if I'd had the chances. Caroline seemed to get so easily. Now I knew what my life should have been. I'd earned Stanford. I'd earned those scholarships. I'd earned the future that Caroline had lived instead. I carefully packed everything back into the box and carried it down the attic ladder. I loaded it into my car just as I saw my parents' Cadillac turning onto their street 3 blocks away. As I drove home, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. I wasn't the shadow in this family. I was the sun, and they stole my light to give it to her. The box from my parents' attic sat in my office like a bomb waiting to detonate. I'd spent the evening documenting everything, scanning each letter and forged document into digital files, creating a timeline that stretched back 25 years. But something my mother had said during our confrontation kept nagging at me, pulling my thoughts in a different direction. You never understood what your husband really was. What had she meant? Robert was a good man, honest and straightforward. He'd been an insurance adjuster, spent his days evaluating claims and determining fair settlements. He was detail-oriented, methodical, careful. Those were the qualities I'd loved about him, his steadiness, his reliability, his unwavering moral compass. I found myself walking to the garage, something I'd been avoiding for 3 years. After Robert died, I'd packed up his belongings in a fog of grief, boxing everything without really looking at it, stacking the boxes in the garage where I wouldn't have to see them every day. Ethan's therapist had suggested I go through them when I was ready. I'd never been ready. Until now. I pulled the garage door closed behind me and turned on the overhead light. Robert's boxes were stacked against the far wall, labeled in my own handwriting from 3 years ago. Robert, office. Robert, clothing. Robert, personal items. I started with the box marked personal items, the one containing photo albums, his watch, his wallet things. I couldn't bring myself to throw away, but couldn't bear to display. The photo albums were on top 3 of them, documenting our 12 years together. I opened the most recent one from the year before he died. Holiday photos mostly. Easter with 6-year-old Ethan hunting eggs in our backyard. Summer vacation at Cape Cod. Halloween. Robert dressed as a pirate while Ethan went as a dinosaur. Then I turned to the Thanksgiving section and my breath caught. There was Robert holding Ethan on his lap, both of them laughing at something off camera. But in the next photo, Robert's expression had changed completely. He was still holding Ethan, but he was staring directly at the camera with an intensity that made my skin prickle. In his free hand, he held a white envelope angled just slightly toward the lens. His jaw was set, his eyes urgent, almost pleading. I'd taken that photo. I remembered the moment now. We'd been at my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner 7 years ago, the last one before Robert died. He'd called me over, asked me to take a picture of him and Ethan. I'd thought he was just being sentimental. But looking at his face now, I saw something else entirely. He'd been trying to tell me something. I pulled the photo from the album sleeve and carried it inside to my office. Using my scanner, I enlarged the image on my computer screen, increasing the resolution until I could see every detail. The envelope in Robert's hand came into sharp focus. On the front, in official-looking print, were the words, Hartford Life Insurance Company, Beneficiary Change Form. My heart started pounding. I zoomed in further. In the corner of the envelope barely visible, Robert had written something in pen. I adjusted the contrast until the words became clear, "Ask your mother about this." I sat back, my mind racing. 2 weeks before Robert died, he'd mentioned something about our life insurance during dinner. "I need to update our beneficiary forms," he'd said. "Standard stuff, but the company requires new signatures every few years." I'd been distracted working on a major presentation for work, and I'd told him to handle it. He'd said he would. I'd forgotten about it completely until now. I stood up and walked to our bedroom to the fireproof safe where we kept important documents. I knew the combination by heart, Ethan's birthday. Inside were our passports, birth certificates, social security cards, and a folder labeled Insurance Policies. I pulled out the life insurance policy and opened it with shaking hands. The policy was for $500,000 taken out when Ethan was born. The beneficiary section was on the third page. Primary beneficiary, Caroline Carter Morrison, signature, Robert J. Carter. Date, November 8th, 7 years ago. Not me. Not Ethan. Caroline. I stared at the signature, Robert's familiar loops and angles, the way he always pressed harder on the downstrokes. But something was wrong. The date was November 8th, 2 days before Robert's accident, and the signature, while close, wasn't quite right. The R in Robert was too narrow, the J too perfectly formed. Robert's handwriting was messier than this, more rushed. He'd been left-handed and always smudged ink slightly when he signed documents. This signature had no smudging. I pulled out other documents from the safe, our mortgage papers, Ethan's birth certificate, Robert's will. I laid them side by side, comparing signatures. On every document we'd signed together, Robert's signature had that characteristic slight smear, that left-handed drag. On the insurance beneficiary form, the signature was pristine, too careful, too practiced. Someone had forged my husband's signature and changed our life insurance beneficiary to Caroline 2 days before he died. I returned to my office and pulled up the accident report I'd requested from the police 3 years ago. I'd read it once, couldn't bear to look at it again, but now I forced myself to review every detail. November 10th, 6:45 in the evening. Robert's car went off Route 128, crashed through a guardrail, rolled down an embankment. Mechanical failure, the report concluded. The brake line had corroded and snapped, causing complete brake failure on a steep downhill stretch. But Robert's car was only 2 years old. The police had noted it in the report. Vehicle well-maintained, regular service records, brake line failure unusual for vehicle age, but determined to be defective manufacturing. I opened my laptop and searched for the insurance payout records. I'd been so consumed with grief that I'd let my parents handle most of the paperwork. They'd told me the insurance company was slow to process everything, that these things took time. 6 months after Robert died, they'd said the payout had finally come through, $50,000, which they'd deposited into a college fund for Ethan. $50,000. Not $500,000. I logged into the insurance company's website using the policy number. It took me 3 tries to reset the password. Robert had set it up originally. When I finally got in, I found the claim history. Total payout, $500,000. Beneficiary Caroline Carter Morrison. Date, paid May 15th, 6 months after Robert's death. Check deposited First National Bank account ending in 7743. I searched for the account number in my records. It wasn't any account I recognized, but I had access to Caroline's financial information through the family trust documents. I cross-referenced the account numbers. Account 7743 was Caroline's personal checking account. My sister had received $500,000 from my husband's death. A husband who supposedly changed his beneficiary 2 days before dying in a suspicious car accident. A husband who'd taken a photograph holding the beneficiary change form with a message telling me to ask my mother about it. Robert knew someone was going to kill him, and he left me the proof hidden in plain sight. I sat in my office for 3 hours after discovering the insurance fraud, staring at the evidence spread across my desk. The forged beneficiary form, the police report, the insurance payout records, the photograph of Robert holding that envelope, his eyes begging me to understand. My hands shook with rage, with grief, with the overwhelming urge to drive to Caroline's house right now and confront her with everything I knew. But that's what the old Emily would have done. The Emily who'd spent 45 years begging for scraps of approval, who'd convinced herself that if she just tried harder, loved more, gave more, they'd finally see her worth. That Emily was gone, buried under the weight of 25 years of calculated betrayal. The new Emily was a financial analyst. The new Emily understood that revenge built on emotion crumbled under scrutiny, but revenge built on documentation was unassailable. I didn't want to scream at Caroline. I wanted to destroy her so completely that she'd spend the rest of her life understanding exactly what she'd taken from me. I opened a new document on my computer and titled it 3-Phase Plan. Then I started typing. Phase 1. Freeze. This was already complete. My parents' accounts remained locked. Their credit cards declined their comfortable life, grinding to a halt. Every day the freeze continued was another day they felt a fraction of the powerlessness they'd inflicted on me for decades. But freezing accounts was temporary. It was a warning shot, not the final blow. Phase 2. Expose. I needed irrefutable evidence that would hold up in court, that would convince law enforcement this wasn't just a family squabble, but systematic fraud spanning decades. That meant professional documentation, expert testimony, forensic analysis that went beyond my own spreadsheets and photographs. I needed people who did this for a living, who could take my evidence and turn it into a criminal case. Phase 3. Destroy. This wasn't just about criminal charges, though those would come. This was about dismantling everything they'd built on their lies. Caroline's reputation, her career, her perfect life funded by stolen scholarships and insurance money. My mother's carefully curated image as the matriarch of a successful family. Their standing in the community, their social circle, their sense of invincibility. I would take it all methodically and completely until they understood what it felt like to lose everything. I saved the document and checked the time. 9:30 at night. Too late to make calls, but not too late to send emails. I opened my contact list and found the name I was looking for: Marcus Robertson. I'd worked with Marcus 5 years ago on a corporate fraud case. He was a forensic accountant, one of the best in the industry, known for his ability to trace money through the most convoluted schemes. He'd once told me over drinks that he owed me a favor after I'd provided the initial tip that led to his biggest case. I'd never collected on that favor. Until now. I composed an email, keeping it brief and professional. Marcus, I need your expertise on a personal matter involving financial fraud, forgery, and possibly insurance fraud connected to a suspicious death. Complex family situation spanning 25 years. Are you available for a confidential consultation? I can pay your standard rate. Emily Carter. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Next, I searched for Linda Chen, an investigative journalist I'd read about in the Boston Globe. She specialized in exposing financial crimes that targeted families, particularly cases where elder abuse and fraud intersected. Her articles were meticulous, devastating, and had led to multiple criminal prosecutions. I found her professional email on the Globe's website and sent a similarly brief message. Ms. Chen, I have documentation of multi-generational financial fraud, forged documents, and suspicious death, possibly connected to insurance fraud, all within one family. Interested in investigating, I have extensive records. Emily Carter. 2 emails sent into the void. Now I had to wait and hope that someone would believe me, would see that this wasn't just a bitter daughter making accusations, but a systematic pattern of criminal behavior. I gathered all the documents from my desk and organized them into labeled folders. Stanford letters and forged applications. Bank statements showing the Carter family trust transfers. The insurance policy with the forged signature, Robert's photograph, the police report from his accident. I created a master timeline in a spreadsheet color-coding each type of fraud: financial in red, forgery in blue, insurance fraud in green. By midnight, I had a 40-page dossier that told the complete story of how my family had stolen my life. My phone buzzed. An email from Marcus Robertson, time-stamped 11:58 p.m. Emily, I remember you. I'm interested. Can you come to my office Monday at 10 a.m.? Bring everything you have. This sounds significant. Marcus. Relief flooded through me. Monday was 3 days away. I could survive 3 more days. I was closing my laptop when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan appeared in my office doorway wearing his pajamas, his hair sticking up on one side. Mom, it's really late. I glanced at the clock. 12:15. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry if I woke you. You didn't. I couldn't sleep. He walked in and sat in the chair across from my desk, the one Robert used to sit in when we'd work on our respective projects in comfortable silence. You've been working every night this week. All these papers everywhere. Mom, are you okay? I looked at my 13-year-old son, at his earnest face and worried eyes, and realized he'd been watching me the same way I'd been watching him after Thanksgiving. Checking for signs of damage, for cracks in the foundation. I'd been so focused on gathering evidence, on building my case against my family, that I hadn't noticed my own child worrying about me. I'm making sure no one ever treats you like that again, I said quietly. What happened at Thanksgiving, what Grandma and Aunt Caroline did to you, I'm making sure they can never do that to anyone else. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing. He was mature for his age, had been forced to grow up too fast after losing his father. Is that what all these papers are? Evidence? Yes. Are you going to sue them? Possibly. It's complicated. I didn't want to tell him about the insurance fraud yet, about the possibility that his father's death wasn't an accident. He'd already lost so much. He deserved to hold on to whatever innocent memories of his grandparents he might still have, at least for a little while longer. He stood up and walked around my desk, wrapping his arms around me from behind in an awkward teenage hug. His chin rested on top of my head. When had he gotten so tall? Mom, I know you're trying to protect me, but who's making sure you're okay? The question broke something loose in my chest. I turned in my chair and hugged him properly, holding on to him the way I should have held on to him at Thanksgiving before letting him stand in that kitchen doorway. I'm okay, sweetheart. I promise. This is what I need to do. For me. For both of us. For your dad. For everyone they've hurt. He nodded against my shoulder, then pulled back. Okay. But Mom, you should sleep sometimes. Dad used to say you get scary when you don't sleep. I laughed, surprised I still could. Your dad was right about a lot of things. Yeah, he was. Ethan kissed the top of my head, another role reversal that made my heart ache. Good night, Mom. Don't stay up too much longer. I won't. He left, and I heard his bedroom door close softly down the hall. I looked at the folders on my desk, at the timeline glowing on my computer screen, at the email from Marcus Robertson, promising help. Step 1 was done. The accounts stayed frozen, my parents trapped in the financial paralysis they'd sentenced me to my entire life. Step 2 would burn their reputation to ashes, exposing every lie, every forged signature, every stolen dollar. And Step 3 would ensure they spent whatever years they had left paying for what they'd done. I shut down my computer and turned off the office light. Tomorrow I'd continue gathering evidence. Monday, I'd meet with Marcus. Soon I'd hear back from Linda Chen. But tonight I'd sleep because Ethan was right. His father always was. Monday morning arrived, cold and gray, typical December weather in Boston. I dropped Ethan at school and drove downtown to Marcus Robertson's office in the financial district. His firm occupied the 18th floor of a glass tower, all polished marble and understated wealth. The kind of place that screamed competence and discretion. Marcus met me in the reception area himself, looking exactly as I remembered, mid-50s silver hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He led me to a conference room where I spent 3 hours walking him through everything. The frozen accounts, the Stanford letters, the forged signatures on the Carter family trust, the life insurance policy with Robert's suspicious beneficiary change, the timing of his accident. Marcus took notes on a legal pad, stopping me occasionally to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, he sat back and removed his reading glasses. "Emily, this is beyond what I typically handle. You're looking at multiple felonies spanning decades, wire fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft, and possibly criminally negligent homicide or even murder if we can prove the accident was deliberate." "I know. My fee for a case this complex would be substantial. We're talking hundreds of hours of work. I have money. The accounts I froze, I'm still a legal co-holder. I can pay you from those funds if necessary. Call it compensation for financial management services." A slight smile crossed his face. "Clever. All right. I'll need copies of everything. I'll also need to bring in a handwriting expert and possibly a mechanical engineer who specializes in automotive forensics. Give me 6 weeks to build the full financial picture." "Thank you, Marcus." "Don't thank me yet. This kind of investigation tends to uncover things people don't expect. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my mother's cryptic comment about Robert, about the years of lies and manipulation. I don't think I have a choice. That afternoon, I went to the downtown post office and mailed 2 thick manila envelopes. The first went to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, containing detailed documentation of the Carter family trust, the forged signatures, the suspicious monthly transfers, and the tax implications of funds moved under fraudulent pretenses. The second went to the Massachusetts Division of Insurance Fraud Bureau with copies of Robert's life insurance policy, the forged beneficiary form, his accident report, and a timeline showing the proximity of the beneficiary change to his death. Both envelopes were sent anonymously with a note stating that more information could be provided upon request through a secure email address I'd created specifically for this purpose. I wasn't ready to attach my name publicly yet, not until Marcus had built an ironclad case. But I wanted federal and state investigators looking into this independently, building their own cases in parallel with mine. The wheels of justice turned slowly, I knew that from my years working in corporate finance. These investigations would take months, maybe a year. But once they started, they were nearly impossible to stop. 2 days later, Linda Chen called. I was at my desk at work reviewing a client's portfolio when my phone rang with an unknown Boston number. "Emily Carter, this is Linda Chen from the Boston Globe. I got your email. I've spent the last 48 hours doing preliminary research on your family, and I need to meet with you immediately. Are you available this evening?" Something in her voice made my pulse quicken. "Yes. Where?" "There's a coffee shop on Newbury Street. Cafe Vittoria, 7 o'clock. She hung up before I could respond. I arrived at Cafe Vittoria 15 minutes early, ordered an espresso I didn't drink, and waited. Linda appeared exactly at 7, a woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes and a leather messenger bag stuffed with papers. She slid into the booth across from me without preamble. "Before we discuss your case, I need to ask you something." She pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. "In your email you mentioned your father. His name is David Carter, correct?" "Yes." "And your mother is Barbara Carter?" "Yes." Linda flipped through her notes. "I've been researching your father's financial history, pulling public records, estate documents, court filings. Your father was meticulous about legal documentation, which makes my job easier. But I found something unusual." She looked up at me. "Does the name Margaret Holloway mean anything to you?" I searched my memory. "No. Should it?" "According to probate records from your paternal grandmother's estate 40 years ago, Margaret Holloway was listed as a beneficiary in a contested will. The contest was eventually withdrawn, but the court documents still exist. After that, I found evidence of monthly payments from your father to Margaret Holloway. Every month for 40 years. The payments stopped when your father died last month." My mind was racing. Payments for what? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The amounts varied but averaged around $2,000 monthly. That's substantial, nearly $1 million over 40 years. I cross-referenced property records. Margaret Holloway owns a home in Lexington about 15 miles from your parents' house. She's never been married, no children listed in any public records. She's currently 58 years old. Why would my father send her money for 40 years? Linda leaned forward. That's what we need to find out. But Emily, here's the thing. If your father was systematically defrauding you and funneling money through various schemes, this could be connected. Or it could be something else entirely. Either way, it's relevant to your story. I drove home in a daze, Linda's information circling through my mind. Margaret Holloway. A woman who'd received money from my father for 4 decades. A woman who lived 15 miles away, but whom I'd never heard mentioned once in my entire life. That night after Ethan went to bed, I found myself on a genealogy website. I'd seen the commercials, the promises of discovering your heritage and connecting with relatives you never knew existed. I ordered a DNA testing kit, with expedited processing paying extra for rush results. The kit arrived 2 days later. I followed the instructions, sealed the vial, and mailed it back. The website promised results in 2 weeks. I tried to focus on other things. Work. Ethan's upcoming winter concert at school. My meetings with Marcus, who was methodically building a forensic analysis of my parents' financial crimes. But every day I checked the genealogy website obsessively, waiting for the email that would tell me my results were ready. 13 days after I mailed the sample, the notification appeared in my inbox at 6 in the morning. Your ancestry DNA results are ready. I was still in my pajamas, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee when I clicked the link. The website loaded, showing my ethnic background. First, Northern European, exactly as expected. Then I clicked on the DNA Matches tab, the section that showed genetic relatives who'd also taken the test. The closest match appeared at the top of the list, close family, half-sibling. The profile name was listed as M. Holloway. Shared DNA. 750 centimorgans consistent with a half-sibling relationship through one parent. I clicked on the profile. The user had uploaded a profile picture, a professional headshot of a woman in her late 50s, with short silver hair, high cheekbones, and a thoughtful expression. But it was her eyes that made me grip the edge of the table. They were my eyes. The exact same shade of gray-green, the same slight downturn at the outer corners, the same way they crinkled at the edges. Below the photo was a brief bio, Margaret Holloway, 58, librarian, Lexington, MA, looking to connect with biological family and understand my father's story. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold. My father had another daughter. A daughter 3 years older than Caroline, 13 years older than me. A daughter he'd supported financially for 40 years but never acknowledged publicly. A daughter who had my eyes and was searching for answers about the same man who'd helped destroy my life. The woman who'd been a ghost in her father's finances had been living nearby all along, and she was my sister. I messaged Margaret through the genealogy website that same morning, my hands shaking as I typed. My name is Emily Carter. The DNA test says we're half-siblings. I have questions about our father. Can we meet? Her response came within an hour. Yes, I've hoped you'd contact me someday. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. There's a cafe in Arlington called The Daily Grind. It's quiet, private. I'll be there. I barely slept that night. My mind spun with possibilities. Was Margaret the product of an affair, a first marriage I'd never known about? Why had my father supported her for 40 years, but kept her hidden? And why did she look at the camera in that profile picture with such profound sadness? The next afternoon, I arrived at the Daily Grind 15 minutes early. It was a small place tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio, with mismatched furniture and shelves lined with used books. Only 3 other customers sat scattered at different tables, absorbed in laptops or novels. I chose a corner booth and ordered tea I had no intention of drinking. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened and Margaret Holloway walked in. She was taller than I'd expected from the photo, with an elegant bearing that suggested years of careful self-possession. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, and she carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder. Her eyes scanned the cafe until they found me, and I watched something complicated cross her face. Recognition, grief, relief, all tangled together. She approached slowly as if I might startle and run. When she reached the table, she stood there for a moment, just looking at me. "Emily," she said softly, "you look just like him. Our father. Please sit down." She slid into the booth across from me, setting her bag on the seat beside her. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her hair, but also the unmistakable genetic echo between us. We had the same narrow wrists, the same way of tilting our heads slightly when listening. "I've been waiting for you to find me for 45 years, Margaret said. Her voice was steady but weighted with emotion. "I knew you would eventually. You're too smart, too thorough. And once your father died..." She trailed off, reaching into her bag and pulling out a photo album. The cover was faded burgundy leather, cracked at the corners from age. "I brought this. I thought you should see it." She slid the album across the table. I opened it with trembling hands. The first photograph showed a teenage girl, Margaret, clearly though impossibly young, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Margaret was smiling down at the infant with such tenderness it made my chest ache. The next photo showed the same baby a few weeks older sleeping on Margaret's shoulder. Then another Margaret feeding the baby with a bottle sunlight streaming through a window behind them. Page after page of a teenager caring for an infant with devoted attention. "That's you," Margaret said quietly. "You were 6 days old in the first picture." I looked up at her, unable to speak. "Your mother Barbara had you when she was 19. She wasn't married. She didn't want to be a mother. She'd just been accepted to graduate school, had plans for her life that didn't include a baby." Margaret's hands were folded on the table, but I could see her knuckles were white. "Your father, our father David, he'd been seeing Barbara for about a year. When she got pregnant, she wanted to give you up for adoption. David begged her not to. He said he'd help, that they'd figure it out together. But Barbara was furious. She felt trapped." I found my voice. "Where were you in all this?" "I was 15 years old. My mother David's first wife had died when I was 12. It was just David and me. When you were born, Barbara took one look at you and refused to hold you. She signed papers allowing David temporary custody with the understanding that he'd arrange an adoption, but David brought you home instead." Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He knocked on my bedroom door at 2 a.m. with you in his arms and said, 'Margaret, I need your help, just for a little while until I can convince Barbara to keep her.' So you raised me. For 6 months. I fed you, changed, you got up with you at night when you cried. David worked during the day, so it was just you and me. I'd take you to the library where I volunteered after school. I'd read to you even though you were too young to understand. You were the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen." She smiled through her tears. "You had these tiny fists that would grab onto my finger and refuse to let go." I stared at the photographs at this teenage girl who'd become a mother to an infant who wasn't biologically hers. What happened after 6 months? Margaret's expression darkened. David finally convinced Barbara to marry him. He promised her everything, that he'd hire nannies, that she could finish her graduate degree, that she'd never have to sacrifice her ambitions. The condition was that she had to keep you, had to raise you as her daughter. Barbara agreed, but only if David cut all ties with me. What? She demanded it. Said she wouldn't raise another woman's child if that woman was still in the picture. Never mind that I was 15 years old and David's daughter. She saw me as a threat, as someone who had a claim on you that she didn't have. So David chose. He chose Barbara and you over me. The words landed like stones. He abandoned you. Legally? Yes. My grandparents took me in. David set up the monthly payments, guilt money, I always thought. Enough to ensure I was taken care of, but not enough to assuage what he'd done. I watched from a distance as you grew up. I saw you at the library sometimes when you were little. You loved books even then. I'd see Barbara drop you off and leave, never staying, never engaging. and I'd want so badly to tell you who I was, but I'd promised David I wouldn't interfere. I was crying now, tears streaming down my face unchecked. You watched me my whole life. As much as I could. When you applied to colleges, I managed to get your application forwarded to me through a contact at your high school. You'd written about wanting to study finance, about making something of yourself despite feeling invisible in your family. I donated to a scholarship fund that year anonymously and made sure you received enough money to attend community college without working full-time. I couldn't get you into Stanford after what they did, but I could help you survive. The memory clicked into place. My first year of community college, a mysterious scholarship had appeared in my financial aid package. Academic Excellence Award for Non-Traditional Students, it was called. $1,500 per semester, just enough to cut my work hours and focus on classes. That was you, Margaret nodded. And when you graduated, I had a friend at your first firm put in a recommendation for you. And when Robert died, her voice broke. When Robert died, I couldn't stay away anymore. I sent money through an anonymous fund, $20,000 marked as emergency family assistance. You used it to pay for his funeral and keep your house. I remembered that money appearing in my account 3 weeks after Robert's death, when I was drowning in funeral expenses and medical bills and the terrifying reality of single parenthood. The note had said it was from a family emergency fund, but there'd been no name, no return address. I'd spent months trying to figure out who'd sent it. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do all that for me? Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. Hers was warm and steady, and I realized I'd been cold for days, maybe years. Because I held you when you were 6 days old and made you a promise. I promised I would always protect you even if I couldn't be with you. I've kept that promise every day for 45 years. I watched you struggle in a family that didn't value you. I watched you marry a good man and lose him too soon. I watched you raise Ethan alone, and I sent money when I could, helped when I could from the shadows because that was all I was allowed. You were never just my half-sister, I said, the understanding washing over me. I was never your mentor, Emily. I was your mother in every way that mattered. Something inside me shattered when Margaret said those words. Not the clean break of sudden trauma, but the slow, devastating collapse of a structure that had been crumbling for decades. I'd spent 45 years believing I was fundamentally unlovable, that something essential was missing from my core that made me unworthy of my mother's affection. I'd internalized every cruel comment, every dismissal, every moment of being positioned at the edge of family photographs. I'd convinced myself that if I just tried harder, achieved more, gave more, I could finally earn what Caroline received effortlessly. But there had been someone who loved me, from the very beginning. Someone who'd held me when I was 6 days old and chosen me completely and without reservation. Someone who'd spent 4 decades watching from the shadows, helping when she could, protecting me in the only ways available to her. The tears came in waves, ugly and uncontrollable. I put my face in my hands and sobbed in the middle of that quiet cafe, while Margaret came around to my side of the booth and wrapped her arms around me. She smelled like lavender and old books, and her embrace was both foreign and achingly familiar, like a melody I'd forgotten, but my body remembered. "I'm sorry," I choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry." "Shh. You have nothing to be sorry for." Margaret held me tighter. "Nothing. Do you understand me? None of this was your fault. I thought I was broken. My whole life I thought there was something wrong with me. There was never anything wrong with you. You were perfect. You are perfect." She pulled back slightly, cupping my face in her hands and forcing me to meet her eyes. "Your mother is broken, Emily. Not you. She was incapable of love, so she blamed you for needing it. That's her failure, not yours." We sat like that for a long time, Margaret holding me, while I cried out 45 years of accumulated pain. The other customers in the cafe pretended not to notice, and I was grateful for their New England restraint. Eventually, my tears slowed, then stopped. I pulled napkins from the dispenser and tried to repair my face, though I suspected I looked like a disaster. "I need to know," I said, my voice hoarse. "Why couldn't you fight for me? You were my sister, his daughter. Didn't you have rights?" Margaret's face tightened with old grief. "I was 15 years old and legally dependent on David. I had no money, no standing. Barbara made it very clear that if I tried to maintain contact with you, she'd accuse me of harassment and get a restraining order. She said she'd make sure I never saw you again, not even from a distance. And David?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "David loved you in his way, but he loved his own comfort more. Barbara made his life easier. I made it complicated, so he chose her. He abandoned his own daughter to keep his wife happy. Yes, and he paid me to stay quiet about it. The monthly checks were guilt payments, hush money dressed up as parental support. I took them because I needed to survive, but I hated every single one." Margaret's jaw clenched. "I wanted to tell you the truth so many times. When you were 10 and I saw you at the library sitting alone in the children's section reading while Barbara shopped across the street ignoring you. When you were 16 and won that academic achievement award but no one from your family attended the ceremony, I was there in the back row crying with pride. When you married Robert and you looked so happy, but your mother barely smiled. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone the truth. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I disrupted your life, Barbara would punish you for it. Afraid that revealing the truth would hurt you more than help you. I told myself that quiet support was better than dramatic revelation. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have fought harder." She looked down at her hands. "Every birthday you had, I lit a candle. Every Christmas I bought you a gift I never sent. Every milestone I celebrated alone. Watching you grow up from a distance was the most exquisite agony I've ever experienced." I reached across and took her hand. "You did what you could with impossible circumstances. You were a child yourself when this started. I was old enough to know right from wrong, old enough to know that what they did to you was cruel." Margaret squeezed my hand. "But I'm not a child anymore, and neither are you. Tell me what's happening now. Your message said you had questions about our father, but there's more to it than that, isn't there?" I hesitated, then decided she deserved the complete truth. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photographs I'd taken of all the evidence. The Stanford acceptance letters. The forged signatures on the Carter family trust documents. The insurance policy with Robert's name signed in someone else's handwriting. The timeline connecting Caroline's windfall to Robert's death. I watched Margaret's face as she scrolled through the images, her expression growing harder with each one. "They stole your college acceptance," she said flatly. "They sent your scholarship money to Caroline. 25 years ago. They've been doing this my entire life." Margaret zoomed in on the insurance policy, studying Robert's forged signature. "And they killed your husband for money." Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I think so. I can't prove it yet, but the timing, the forged beneficiary form, the mechanical failure on a 2-year-old car, it's too convenient." Who benefited? Caroline. $500,000 deposited directly into her account 6 months after Robert died. Margaret set my phone down carefully as if it were made of something explosive. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Your mother destroyed both of us. She took you from me when you were 6 months old. She poisoned David against me so completely that he chose her over his own daughter. She spent 45 years making sure you felt worthless so you'd never question her control. And when your husband threatened that control by giving you stability and love, she had him eliminated." The words hung between us, stark and undeniable. "I've frozen their accounts," I said. "I've filed anonymous reports with the IRS and the Insurance Fraud Bureau. I've hired a forensic accountant to document everything. But it's not enough. I want them to pay for all of it. The stolen future, the murdered husband, the decades of psychological abuse. I want justice." Margaret's eyes met mine, and I saw my own rage reflected back at me. Then let's get it. Together. I've watched from the shadows for 45 years. I'm done hiding. She pulled a business card from her wallet and slid it across the table. I'm a research librarian. I have access to databases most people don't even know exist. Legal records, newspaper archives, genealogical documents, property transfers. If it's documented somewhere, I can find it. What do you need? Everything. Every lie, every crime, every person they've hurt. I want a complete picture so when this goes to trial, there's no defense, they can mount no sympathy they can claim. Margaret nodded slowly. There's something else you should know. When Barbara demanded that David give you back to her, she didn't just want a baby. She wanted to prove she could take something from me. She saw me as competition, a 15-year-old girl who'd cared for you better in 6 months than she could in a lifetime. Your existence wasn't about you to her. It was about winning. I was a trophy. And so was Caroline. Barbara collected daughters the way other people collect art to display to prove her worth to arrange in ways that made her look good. But you were never supposed to outshine Caroline. That was the unforgivable sin. I thought about the Stanford letters about my 1480 SAT score listed as Caroline's. I was supposed to be the supporting character in Caroline's story. But you refused to stay in that role. You succeeded anyway despite everything they did to sabotage you. You married, well-raised a good son, built a career. That terrified her. So she had to eliminate the source of your strength. Margaret's voice was cold now, analytical. Robert had to go. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all settling over us. Then Margaret reached across the table and took both my hands in hers. She didn't just steal your future, Emily. She's been stealing your past, rewriting history to erase the fact that you were loved first, that you were wanted, that you mattered. Let's take it all back. Every piece, every truth, every stolen moment. Let's make sure the world knows exactly who Barbara Carter is and what she's done. I squeezed her hands, feeling strength flow between us. Together. Together, Margaret echoed. Mother and daughter, the way it should have been all along. Margaret and I met 3 more times over the following 2 weeks, always at the daily grind, always in the quiet corner booth that had become our unofficial headquarters. She brought boxes of documents she'd accumulated over the years. Property records showing my parents' real estate purchases, newspaper clippings about Caroline's various achievements, even old letters from our father that revealed the calculating nature beneath his silence. I brought Marcus Robertson's preliminary forensic analysis and the anonymous case numbers from my IRS and insurance fraud reports. Together we built a timeline so comprehensive that every lie my family had told could be traced to its origin. But documentation, while powerful, wasn't enough. I needed something more dramatic, more final. Something that would force everyone to confront the truth simultaneously with no room for individual spin or private denial. I want to host a dinner, I said during our 4th meeting. Margaret looked up from the spreadsheet she was reviewing, her reading glasses perched on her nose. A reconciliation dinner in March. Not Thanksgiving too obvious, but close enough symbolically. I'll invite my parents, Caroline extended family, maybe even some of Caroline's colleagues and my parents' country club friends. Margaret set down her pen slowly. You want to expose them publicly? I want everyone who's ever admired Barbara Carter's perfect family to see exactly what she built that perfection on. I want Caroline's professional reputation attached to the words insurance fraud and forgery. I want my parents' social circle to know they've been friends with criminals for decades. I pulled out my phone and showed her a concept I'd been sketching. I'll set up screens around the dining room. During dessert, I'll project the evidence, the Stanford letters, the forged signatures, the insurance policy, everything. No one leaves until they've seen it all. That's not just revenge, Margaret said quietly. That's obliteration. They obliterated me first. They just did it slowly over 45 years, so no one noticed. Margaret was silent for a long moment, studying my face. Then she nodded. All right, let's plan it. But we need to be strategic. If you're going to do this publicly, every detail needs to be perfect. The evidence needs to be presented clearly enough that even people who want to defend your family can't find holes. And you need legal protection witnesses' recordings, notarized documents. This can't look like a vindictive daughter making wild accusations. I know, that's why I need you there. You're the witness to the beginning of all this. You're the proof that Barbara's cruelty started before I could even remember. We spent the next hour planning logistics. Guest list, catering, room layout, the technical setup for the projectors. Margaret suggested we hire a court stenographer to record everything, creating an official transcript that could be used in legal proceedings. I proposed we invite Linda Chen as a guest, giving her exclusive access to break the story in the Boston Globe the next morning. This wasn't just a family confrontation, it was a calculated destruction of carefully constructed lies. I was reviewing seating arrangements on my laptop that evening when Ethan knocked on my office door. It was nearly 9 o'clock, past the time he usually went to bed on school nights. He stood in the doorway in his pajama pants and an old t-shirt, holding his laptop under one arm. Mom, I need to show you something. Something in his voice made me close my own computer immediately. Of course. Come in. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where Margaret had sat where Robert used to sit. He looked nervous, his fingers drumming against the laptop case. Promise you won't be mad. Ethan, what is it? Last Thanksgiving, after what happened at Grandma's house, I started thinking about Dad. He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed a folder labeled Family Recordings, containing dozens of audio files organized by date. Dad used to say that in his job as an insurance adjuster, documentation was everything. That people lie, but records don't. So I thought, maybe I should document things too. My heart started beating faster. Document what? Every conversation I had with Grandma and Aunt Caroline. Every time they called, every time they visited before you froze the accounts, every time Mom said I had to go over there. I used the voice memo app on my phone. He clicked on the first file dated November 28th of last year, 3 days after Thanksgiving. I was scared, Mom. After what they did to me, I was scared they might hurt you next. So I started recording everything. He pressed play. Caroline's voice filled my office crystal clear. Barbara, we need to discuss Emily. She's becoming unpredictable. Freezing our accounts was just the first move. Who knows what she'll do next? My mother's response was equally clear. Emily has always been manageable. We just need to apply the right pressure. Remind her what happened to Robert when he tried to protect her from us. I grabbed the laptop, staring at the screen. When was this recorded? Last December. Aunt Caroline came over to Grandma's house to talk about you. I was supposed to be in the other room watching TV, but I left my phone on the bookshelf near where they were sitting. Ethan's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. There are more. A lot more. He clicked through the files. January 3rd. Caroline and my mother discussing how to access the frozen accounts, with Caroline saying, Emily doesn't know about Stanford. Mother buried that perfectly. January 20th. My mother talking on the phone to someone about the insurance situation, saying Robert's death was unfortunate, but the insurance worked out exactly as planned. Caroline needed that money. February 14th. Caroline's voice again talking to someone I didn't recognize. Ethan looks too much like Robert. It's unsettling. We need to keep him distant from the family. Can't risk him asking questions about his father's accident. The boy's too smart. I listened to file after file, my horror growing with each recording. My 13-year-old son had been conducting his own investigation for over a year, gathering evidence in the most dangerous way possible by putting himself in proximity to people who'd already demonstrated they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. Ethan, this was incredibly brave but also incredibly dangerous. If they'd found out you were recording them... I know. But Mom, they already hurt Dad, and they hurt you your whole life. I thought if I could prove what they were doing, maybe you could stop them before they hurt anyone else." His eyes met mine, and I saw Robert in them, the same determination, the same unwavering moral clarity. "I'm not a little kid anymore. I understand what they did. They stole your college acceptance. They stole Dad's insurance money. They made you feel worthless your whole life. And they probably—" His voice wavered. "They probably killed Dad, didn't they?" I wanted to lie to protect him from this truth, but he deserved honesty. "I think so. Yes." He nodded, taking this in with a composure that broke my heart. "Then you need these recordings. There are 47 files total. Some are short, just a few minutes. Others are almost an hour. I dated and labeled everything. I even made backup copies on a flash drive that I keep in my locker at school." I pulled him into a hug, this child who'd become an adult far too soon. "You're amazing. You know that. You're the bravest person I know." "I learned from you," he said into my shoulder. "You taught me to fight back. I'm just doing what you're doing, making sure they can't lie anymore." I pulled back and looked at him. These recordings could be crucial evidence. With your permission, I want to give copies to Marcus Robertson, my forensic accountant, and potentially to the FBI when the time comes. Are you okay with that? That's why I recorded them. He closed the laptop. I'm your witness, Mom, and I have everything on record. March 15th arrived with the kind of crisp spring weather that made Boston beautiful, clear skies, temperatures in the low 60s, cherry blossoms just beginning to open on the trees lining my street. I'd sent the invitations 3 weeks earlier, formal cardstock with elegant script. "Emily Carter requests the pleasure of your company for a family reconciliation dinner." I'd included my parents Caroline and her family, my father's brother and his wife, several cousins I barely knew, and half a dozen of my parents' closest friends from their country club. 23 people in total, plus Margaret, who would arrive separately and sit quietly in the back. The responses had come quickly. My mother called within hours of receiving her invitation, her voice carefully neutral. "Does this mean you're prepared to be reasonable about the accounts?" "It means I want to talk. As a family." I'd kept my voice equally neutral, giving nothing away. Caroline had texted, "About time you came to your senses. We'll be there." I'd hired caterers, rented extra tables and chairs, set up a projector and screen in my dining room, under the guise of showing family photos and memories. Marcus Robertson had helped me prepare the digital presentation, organizing the evidence into a devastating timeline. Linda Chen sat on my back patio with her laptop ready to file her story the moment I gave her the signal. And Ethan, my brave, brilliant son, had copied all 47 audio recordings onto a master file, queued and ready to play. My parents arrived at 5:30, my mother dressed in an expensive silk blouse and pearls, my father shuffling behind her with the diminished energy of a man who'd aged considerably in the past 4 months. She surveyed my house with barely concealed criticism, her eyes lingering on the rental tables set up in my living room. "Emily, this is quite elaborate. I hope you're not expecting us to suddenly forget the past few months of unpleasantness. I'm hoping we can move forward, Mom, as a family." The lie tasted bitter, but I smiled through it. Caroline arrived 20 minutes later with her husband Tom and their 2 children. Madison, now 10, wore a designer dress and immediately attached herself to her grandmother. Caroline's son Nathan, 8 years old, headed straight for Ethan's room where video games awaited. Caroline herself looked polished and confident, clearly believing she'd won some unspoken battle. "Your house looks nice, Em," she said, handing me a bottle of wine I knew cost at least $80. Smaller than I remembered, but cozy. The other guests trickled in, aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents' friends who'd known me since childhood, but had never bothered to know me at all. They filled my home with polite conversation and the kind of superficial warmth that characterized families who'd perfected the art of looking functional while being fundamentally broken. Margaret arrived last, slipping in through the side door as we'd planned. She wore a simple black dress and took a seat in the corner near the projector, a spot where she could see everything but wouldn't draw attention. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and she gave me the smallest nod. Dinner proceeded exactly as planned. The caterers served herb-roasted chicken garlic mashed potatoes, spring vegetables, and fresh rolls. Wine flowed freely. Conversation hummed with the careful avoidance of controversial topics. My mother held court at one end of the table, entertaining her friends with stories about her recent cruise plans. Caroline laughed too loudly at her husband's jokes, performing the role of successful daughter and devoted wife. And Ethan sat at the table, right in the middle between me and a cousin he'd never met. No kitchen, no doorway. At the family table where he belonged. My mother's eyes had flickered to him when we sat down, a frown crossing her face. But with 20 guests present, she said nothing. Just pursed her lips and turned away, a small act of rejection I catalogued mentally. As the main course ended and the caterers cleared plates, my mother raised her wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast." The room quieted. To family. Despite our differences, despite the challenges we've faced, it's nice when people remember their obligations. To forgiveness and moving forward. To forgiveness. Caroline echoed, her glass raised, her smile smug. I stood slowly, holding the remote control I'd kept beside my plate. "Actually, before we have dessert, I'd like to share some family memories. I put together a little presentation." My mother frowned. "Emily, that's not really necessary." "I insist." I clicked the remote. The lights dimmed automatically. The projector hummed to life and a screen descended from the ceiling mount I'd installed that morning. "It won't take long." The first image appeared on the screen, a photograph of me at 18, smiling in my high school graduation cap and gown. Below it, text read, "Emily Carter, class of 1999, GPA 4.0, SAT score 1480, college applications 8. My mother shifted uncomfortably. "Emily, what is this?" The next slide showed the Stanford acceptance letter enlarged, so every word was visible. Several guests leaned forward reading. My uncle's wife whispered, "She got into Stanford, full scholarship," I said calmly. "Presidential scholar, tuition, room and board for 4 years. The acceptance letter arrived in April 1999. I never saw it." Click. The next slide showed the unopened envelope, my name and address clearly visible, the Stanford seal unmistakable. My mother intercepted it, hid it, told me I'd been rejected. "This is ridiculous." Caroline stood abruptly. "Mom, we don't have to sit here and—" "Sit down, Caroline." My voice was steel. "You're going to want to see this next part." The slide changed to show Caroline's college application from 2 years later, with my SAT scores listed as hers. Then copies of scholarship checks made out to Emily Carter with deposit slips showing them going into Caroline's accounts. Then the forged recommendation letters, Mr. Henderson's words of praise, redirected from Stanford to community college. The room had gone completely silent. My mother's face was white. Caroline stood frozen, her mouth open. "For 25 years I thought I wasn't good enough, that I'd failed. But I didn't fail. My family stole my future and gave it to Caroline." Click. The screen showed the Carter family trust documents. "Then they stole my money." Click. Robert's life insurance policy with the forged signature. "Then they murdered my husband." "That's a lie." My mother tried to stand, her hand clutching her chest. "You can't prove—" "Actually, I can." I nodded to Ethan, who pressed play on his laptop. The speakers crackled, then Caroline's voice filled the room. "Emily doesn't know about Stanford. Mother buried that perfectly." Then my mother's voice. "Robert's death was unfortunate, but the insurance worked out exactly as planned." Caroline again. "We need to keep Ethan distant. Can't risk him asking questions about his father's accident." The recordings played for 3 minutes, damning statement after damning statement, while my parents' friends stared in horror and my relatives sat frozen in their seats. Madison started crying. Tom grabbed Caroline's arm, his face shocked and angry. My uncle pushed back from the table, standing. "Barbara, what the hell is this?" My mother clutched her chest harder, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. I can't breathe. Mom." Caroline moved toward her, but my mother was already falling, her knees buckling as she slid from her chair. She hit the floor with a heavy thud, her pearls scattering across my hardwood floor like dice. Chaos erupted. My uncle dropped to his knees beside her, checking for a pulse. Someone screamed for someone to call 911. Tom pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. Caroline knelt beside our mother, sobbing while Madison wailed in the background. I stood at the head of the table, remote control still in my hand, and watched the woman who'd birthed me collapse under the weight of her own crimes. Part of me wanted to help, to rush forward and perform CPR to save her the way she'd never saved me. But a larger part, the part that had spent 45 years suffocating under her cruelty, stood frozen, watching her face consequences for the first time in her life, even if those consequences meant her heart gave out. The ambulance arrived within 7 minutes. EMTs rushed into my dining room, pushing past horrified guests, and worked on my mother while Caroline sobbed and my father stood in the corner looking 10 years older than he had an hour before. They stabilized her enough to transport, loaded her onto a gurney, and wheeled her out through my front door while neighbors gathered on their lawns to watch. Caroline rode in the ambulance. The rest of the guests left quickly, some offering awkward condolences, others avoiding my eyes entirely. One of my parents' country club friends paused at the door, an elegant woman in her 70s who'd known me since childhood. "What you showed us tonight, is it true?" "Every word, every document." She nodded slowly. "Then I'm sorry, Emily, for not seeing it sooner." She left without another word. Margaret stayed and helped me clean up. We worked in silence, packing away untouched desserts, collecting scattered pearls from the floor, taking down the projector screen. Linda Chen had already left, racing back to the Globe to file her story before the midnight deadline. By morning, the world would know what the Carter family really was. That was 3 months ago. The reunion video, recorded by one of my cousins on his phone, leaked online within 48 hours. Someone posted it to social media with the caption, "Woman exposes family's decades of fraud at reconciliation dinner. This is wild." It went viral. 5 million views in 3 days. 10 million by the end of the week. Suddenly, I wasn't just Emily Carter, financial analyst and single mother. I was that woman who destroyed her family at dinner, and the daughter who exposed her mother's crimes, and the Thanksgiving revenge lady, even though it hadn't been Thanksgiving at all. The story exploded. Linda Chen's article in the Boston Globe was picked up by national news outlets. Cable news shows debated whether my public exposure was justified or cruel. True crime podcasters dissected every detail of Robert's death. Reddit created mega-threads analyzing the evidence I'd presented. My inbox flooded with messages, half calling me a hero for speaking truth, half calling me a vindictive monster who'd weaponized my mother's health crisis for attention. Caroline was fired from her executive position within a week. Her company released a statement about ethical violations inconsistent with our corporate values. Her social media accounts went dark. Her husband, Tom, filed for divorce 2 months later, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking full custody of Madison and Nathan. The insurance fraud investigation that I'd started anonymously was now very public, with the Massachusetts Attorney General announcing a formal inquiry into Robert's death and the forged beneficiary documents. My father moved out of their Florida condo and disappeared. I heard through my uncle that he'd rented a small apartment somewhere in New Hampshire, that he refused to answer calls or speak to anyone. His monthly payments to Margaret had stopped when he died. I realized he'd passed away from a heart attack 2 weeks after the reunion, the stress and shame apparently too much for his compromised cardiovascular system. I hadn't attended his funeral. Neither had Margaret. Extended family members made their allegiances clear through public Facebook posts and carefully worded statements. My uncle wrote, "I stand with Emily. What was done to her was unconscionable." 2 cousins unfriended me and posted about family loyalty and airing dirty laundry. My mother's country club friends divided into camps, some ostracized, her others rallied around her with defensive posts about understanding the full context and not rushing to judgment. But despite the vindication, despite the public acknowledgement that I'd been telling the truth, I felt hollow. I'd thought exposure would bring peace, that seeing my family face consequences would heal something fundamental that had been broken in me. Instead, it just brought noise. Constant, overwhelming noise. Reporters camped outside my house for 2 weeks. Ethan couldn't go to school without classmates asking intrusive questions. My office received so many calls that my boss finally asked me to take a leave of absence until things calmed down. One night in June, 3 months after the reunion, Ethan found me sitting in the dark in my office staring at my laptop screen filled with emails I couldn't bring myself to answer. "Mom, you okay?" "Just tired, sweetheart." He sat down in the chair across from me, the one where Margaret sat, where Robert used to sit. "Was it worth it? Everything that happened?" I looked at my son, at his serious face, and his father's eyes, and realized I didn't know how to answer. "I don't know. I thought I would feel different. Lighter, maybe. Like I'd finally gotten justice. But you don't. I just feel tired. And sad. And angry that it had to come to this." I closed the laptop. "Your grandmother is still in the hospital. They say she had a minor stroke during the reunion, that the stress triggered it. Caroline lost her job and her marriage. Your grandfather died. And yes, they deserved consequences for what they did. But it doesn't feel like winning. It just feels like destruction." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Dad used to say that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good, that sometimes it just feels necessary. Your dad was a wise man." "Yeah, he was." 2 months later in August, I received a call from Mass General Hospital. My mother had collapsed again, this time more serious. Another stroke, the doctor said, affecting her speech and mobility. She was asking for me, he added, though her requests were difficult to understand given the damage to her language centers. I called Margaret immediately. "She wants to see me." "Don't go." Margaret's voice was firm. "She's manipulated you your entire life, Emily. Even now she's trying to control you through guilt." "I know. But I need to see this through. I need to look her in the eyes one more time." "Then I'm coming with you." We drove to the hospital together, Margaret gripping my hand in the parking lot before we went inside. "Whatever she says, remember, you don't owe her forgiveness. You don't owe her peace. You did what needed to be done." My mother's room was on the 4th floor in the stroke recovery unit. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her face slack on one side, her hair thin and gray without its usual professional styling. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm. Monitors beeped steadily. Her eyes opened when we entered. She saw me first, then Margaret behind me. Something flickered across her face. Recognition fear, maybe regret. Her right hand, the one that still had movement, reached toward the bedside table. "The watch," she whispered. Her words slurred but understandable. "Robert's watch. I kept... shouldn't have." My heart started pounding. "What watch?" She fumbled with something in the drawer of her bedside table, her movements slow and uncoordinated. Finally, she pulled out a small key attached to a paper tag. "Bank of America Safe Deposit Box 847. She pressed it into my palm, her fingers cold and weak. Inside, his watch. I took it. From the crash. Before police came. There's something hidden. He knew. Emily, he knew everything." Her eyes closed and the heart monitor's beeping slowed. A nurse rushed in, checking her vitals, adjusting her IV. Margaret pulled me out into the hallway while medical staff swarmed the room. "What watch?" Margaret asked. "Did Robert have a special watch?" "Yes, a silver Omega his father gave him for our wedding. He wore it every single day. After the accident, the police said his personal effects were destroyed in the crash. His wallet, his phone, his watch. They gave me his wedding ring that was all they could recover." I stared at the key in my palm. But she took his watch. She was there before the police, and she took evidence from the scene. We drove directly to the Bank of America downtown. I showed my ID, showed the key, signed the access log. The bank manager led us to a private room and brought out box 847. It was small, maybe 8 by 10 inches unremarkable gray metal. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was Robert's silver watch, exactly as I remembered it. The face was cracked, the leather band torn, but it was unmistakably his. I lifted it carefully, and something rattled inside. Margaret leaned closer. "The back. Check the back." I turned the watch over. The backing plate was loose, held on by tiny screws that had been removed and replaced. Someone had opened it recently. I used my fingernail to pry off the backing. A micro SD card fell into my palm, no bigger than my thumbnail. Inside the safe deposit box was Robert's silver watch, and something hidden inside it that would change everything. Margaret and I sat in my car in the bank parking lot staring at the SD card resting in my palm. It was so small, so ordinary, and yet my mother's words echoed in my mind. He knew everything. Robert had hidden this card in his watch, the watch he wore every day, the watch my mother had stolen from the crash site, and now, 7 years after his death, I held whatever truth he'd tried to preserve. "Are you going to look at it now?" Margaret asked quietly. "Not here. At home. With Ethan. He deserves to know what his father left us." But we didn't go home immediately. Something pulled me back to the hospital, back to the woman lying in that sterile room who'd just handed me the key to her own destruction. I needed to understand why. After 45 years of cruelty, why confess now? Why help me find evidence that would confirm her involvement in Robert's death? Margaret came with me. We rode the elevator to the 4th floor in silence, walked past nurses and orderlies who barely glanced at us, and stood outside my mother's room. Through the window I could see her sleeping, her chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. Her face slack and peaceful in a way I'd never seen when she was conscious. "I need to stay," I told Margaret. "Just for a little while. I need to understand." "Then I'll stay with you." We pulled chairs into the room and sat on opposite sides of my mother's bed. For 2 hours we said nothing, just sat there watching this woman who'd caused so much damage. She woke once, looked at me with clouded eyes that didn't seem to recognize me, and whispered, "Caroline," before falling back asleep. I returned the next day, and the next, and the day after that. For a week, I spent my afternoons in that hospital room watching my mother drift in and out of consciousness. The doctors explained that she'd had a major ischemic stroke, that the damage was significant, and that testing revealed early-stage Alzheimer's disease that had likely been progressing for 2 or 3 years. The Alzheimer's could explain some behavioral changes, the neurologist told me on the 3rd day. Increased paranoia, poor judgment, difficulty managing complex tasks. The disease affects different people in different ways, but personality changes are common. I thought about my mother's increasing erratic behavior over the past few years, the way she'd become obsessed with controlling her accounts, the paranoid phone calls about Caroline needing to visit more often, the strange insistence on that Thanksgiving dinner that had started everything. Had the disease been clouding her judgment, or had she always been this cruel, and the Alzheimer's simply stripped away her ability to hide it? On the 5th day, my mother woke up more alert than she'd been all week. She saw me sitting beside her bed, and her eyes filled with tears. Her mouth moved, trying to form words, but the stroke damage made speech nearly impossible. She gestured frantically toward the notepad on her bedside table. I handed it to her along with a pen. Her right hand shook as she wrote the letters barely legible. "It wasn't me who hurt Robert." I stared at the words, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" She wrote more slower this time, pressing hard enough that the pen tore through the paper. "I only helped hide it. I'm sorry." "Who hurt him? Who killed Robert?"